Hello, I'm Jon Nelson, your host for this edition of Atheist United's TV Outreach Series. Our topic this time is domestic violence, violence that is taught in the home and the church, as we will demonstrate, and which spills over to terrorize the whole community. Though most of us have been obsessed with violence and politicians have fed on this fear and campaigned for office with quick fix solutions, domestic violence has been largely ignored by the general society, by our law and order police, and by the courts for much too long. But it has finally become too costly in human suffering and economic costs, not only to the primary victims, but to a whole range of other people, fanning out to the whole society. Though it's generally agreed that we must do something to stop this war on women, strangely enough, the causes and solutions that have been bantered about have studiously avoided recognizing the role so-called holy books have played in instilling dangerous attitudes in society that affect even those who profess no allegiance to any religion. We maintain this problem can be cured if we're willing to make the necessary changes to finally eliminate domestic violence, rape, and child abuse. That's right, we know it can be done, but only if we agree with Jesus, the truth will set us free. I love quoting from the Bible, and we will do that during this program, and a lot of the quotes are sure to surprise you. We are pleased to have as our guest this time Ms. Lisa Jo Singletary, who's a very dear friend of mine, and she also has firsthand knowledge about the problem of domestic violence. Lisa is the president of the Humanist Association of Los Angeles, and she's also president of the Alliance of Atheist, Humanist, and Ethical Culture Societies. In fact, she has she's garnered many honors for her work in this field. The Society of Battered Women organizations, the most recent being Volunteer of the Year Award from the Association to Aid Victims of Domestic Violence. Welcome, Lisa Jo. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, John. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, would you briefly review the problem for us?
As far as statistics are concerned, there's certain conflicting information that we're getting. But in 1987, studies seem to indicate that there were about 2 million women being battered yearly. But by 1992, this had increased to 4 million. And in 1994, some reports say 6 million. We don't believe that's actually doubled in that period of time, just that more women are coming out of the closet because people's consciousness is being raised in these areas. But I think a very significant study was done last year. It was related to anonymous questionnaires, and this study showed that when asked anonymously, 52% of women say that they have been beaten at least once by a significant other. So.
A natural question often asked is why abused women stay, why they don't get away from their abuser.
And the answer is complex, but just to give you the basic information, John, number one is that between 80 and 90% of all women who request shelter are unable to get it. Depends on the area that you live in. And another very big element that's always involved is that we know now, just as a result of studies in the last few years, we know that women are 14 times as apt to be seriously wounded or murdered during the course of leaving or after they have actually left the batterer, especially with the restraining order. This sometimes enrages men when they see that their victim's going to escape.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we're talking about spousal stalking then. We're hearing a lot more about the woman, the dangers that a woman faces when she leaves her abuser.
Yes, the number one cause of death to women in the workplace is murder. And of course the children are at stake also. The average age of children beaten to death is 2 years old.
Now, Lisa, you said in many of your speeches that you found teachings in the Bible, as we have, that lay the foundation for attitudes that lead to this domestic violence that you're talking about.
Absolutely, John, and I just happen to have a few quotations here.
Well, that's convenient.
Let's say from Ephesians 5:22, it says, "Just as the church is subject to Christ, let the wives be subject to their husbands in all things." In Corinthians, they are condemned to be under obedience. Peter says, "Be subject to your masters in all fear." Husband shall rule over thee. Woman is to remain silent and not to teach.
Well, we've been focusing on the abuse of women here, but men also have suffered abuse.
Yes, we have coming in on the hotlines, domestic violence hotlines, we get 3 to 5% of males being abused. However, in male abuse, it doesn't appear to end in murder or serious physical injury unless there's unless the history is an actual battering of the women for at least 6 years. Most women who commit murder have been battered at least 6 years before they...
I see. What changes, if any, have been made in the courts and police departments as a result of public awareness of this problem?
Well, a number of suits have been brought by the women's movement on behalf of the surviving children of women who repeatedly asked for help or shelter or protection and were not able to get it, and they were subsequently murdered. These changes have begun in various areas, have caused different laws to be set up now, but enforcement of the laws is very spotty. It depends entirely on, for instance, how the policeman who comes out to the home, how he writes it up will determine whether or not it's prosecuted. And when you look at the 3 largest groups of batterers, they happen to be policemen, dentists, and ministers are the 3 largest groups of batterers.
Really, I didn't
by
know
profession.
That. Well, what about therapy groups for batterers?
We have, for the first time in history, we actually have access to these men because of the court decisions that say that a man is to be given a choice. He can either go into therapy or go to prison. And of course, naturally, it's to his benefit to go into therapy to avoid going to prison. It's very questionable. The value of coerced or enforced therapy is highly questionable. We're getting conflicting statistics. It may be that some men learn to play the therapy game, and we find the best results from battery programs for males are inside the prison, where, in other words, he's already in the prison, and so he doesn't gain anything by going through the therapy.
Now, how about when the courts force the batterer to go to what you're talking about, these support groups and correctional facilities?
That's the question. We don't know how effective enforced or coercive therapy is. We don't know. Some studies have said 1 out of 4 are successfully treated. And we don't know whether this is really true or whether they learn to play the therapy game.
Yeah.
I don't know. But at least we have access to them. We didn't have even access in the past. So.
Well, when the courts force these people to go and they don't have anything to show for it, I can see where it would be a waste of time and taxpayers' money too. But from what I understand, there's a lot of quotes from these batterers. They say things like, "I was raised to believe that as the man, I have to be in control," and things of that nature. So I'm sure you've come across that too.
Yes, a lot of men seem to think that their wife is their property. And of course, once again, you go back to the religious conditioning and even the marriage ceremony itself. Who gives this woman to this man? She is transferred as property from the father to the man, to the husband.
Well, we know where these attitudes come from. St. Ambrose, one of the church fathers, said, "Adam was deceived by Eve, and it is right that he whom woman induced to sin should assume the role of guide."
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Another great one is from Ephesians. It says, "Be obedient to your masters with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ, with good will doing service as to the Lord, whether a slave or free." In other words, get yourself straight inside. Get your mental attitude straight in taking this abuse. Don't just give lip service and pretend that you're with the program of being abused, but you're supposed to make yourself sincere at heart in your acceptance of your lot in life, whether a slave or free. You know, the old slaveholders in the South used to quote directly from the Bible in order to justify slavery.
Absolutely.
And with good reason.
And there aren't any quotes in the Bible that I know of that specifically condemn slavery either, as far as I know. Also from that good book, we've got 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 and 12, quote, "Let the women learn in silence with all subjection. I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over the man." Now that one's causing a lot of trouble nowadays with so many women in the workplace.
Certainly is. A lot of men resent this type of thing. I wanted to say that there are conditionings here that brainwash, in a sense, indoctrinate the entire society. If a woman is being battered and she's a religious person and she takes the Bible seriously, what does she learn when she goes to the Bible for counsel and guidance? It says, "All that live godly in Jesus Christ shall suffer persecution." Well, there. And in Hebrews it says, "Whom the Lord loveth, he scourgeth and chasteneth." In other words, perhaps this has happened to you because the Lord loves you. And of course we're conditioned in society too that when you're beaten as a child, the parents may tell you, "I'm doing this because I love you." And now here's your husband saying, "I love you," but bam, bam, you know. And also in Hebrews it says, "Worldly misery and destitution is the lot of the godly." Thanks a lot, you know. And then, of course, turn the other cheek over and over. And 1 Peter, just a final quotation, it says, "No evil shall happen to the godly. Therefore, you either had this beating coming or you were not godly enough." One of the two. Excuse me.
Yeah, so these quotes are pretty insidious, aren't they? They don't seem to be doing too much to help the women in society. And on the contrary, they just force them to stay under the man. I've heard that batterers and their victims often come from a home where battering was routine. Would you comment on that for us?
Yes, there is a great deal of child abuse in the society, and some of the men have been battered as children. However, as far as sexual abuse and incest and etc., we find that more females have undergone this than males, and yet females don't tend to grow up and turn into murderers and etc. So we have to look at the religious indoctrination and the early socialization of the males in our society.
Well, child abuse is related to all this too. Children learn to batter from being battered. And as recommended in the Bible, now I've got a couple of quotes. There's Proverbs 22:15, quote, "The rod and reproof give wisdom, a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame." And Proverbs 13:24, quote, "He that spareth the rod hateth his son, but he that loveth his son chasteneth him." That's pretty much what you said just now. And also Proverbs 23:13, "If thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die." Well, Lisa, many of them do die. And there are many parents that maim and kill their children. And these numbers, I'm sure that you can validate, these numbers are much higher than society would like us to know.
Yes, I definitely agree. It also says that a disobedient child shall be taken before the town elders and stoned to death.
Oh, that's nice.
And that, I believe they specifically mentioned gluttony as one of the reasons for this.
See, there's family values for you, isn't it? Well, we need a sea change in popular thinking here. Wouldn't you agree? We've got to give up these beliefs that are clung to blindly, unreasoningly. We just can't afford that any longer. Fear of going to some imaginary hell. This has created a very real hell on earth. And it's time for some rationality, for some critical thinking. We need to re-examine these beliefs. We need to re-examine the Bible and what we're told by church leaders. These church leaders are always telling people to go and be godly, and they tell the women to just suffer in silence. Can we continue ignoring the results of these religious teachings? I don't think we can.
No, I think our society is a direct result of a lot of these attitudes. It's a uniquely Christian idea that one should burn for eternity. In other words, other religions which we in this country would consider barbaric, Islamic fundamentalists, the penalty for blasphemy would be stoning to death. But even they don't say that we'll reach beyond the grave and burn you for eternity. That's uniquely Christian. And of course the Quran says that any evil that befalls you is a result of your own doing. You had this coming to you from a previous life or whatever. No, I'm sorry, that's the Buddhists who say that. Even the most enlightened or so-called liberal religions like Buddhism will say, have the idea of karma. And that means that whatever happens to you befalls you because of a previous life, and whatever you did in that life justifies this.
Well, let's get back to the batterers for a sec. That's the root of the problem. Is locking them up the answer? I wanted to ask you, what do you think about this 3 strikes and you're outlaw?
I think it's a serious mistake. It's a political scapegoat. But I really think that with the 3 strikes you're out, there are several serious repercussions. Number one, there will be a tremendous increase in murder, especially of women. I feel positive that men who rape will be far more willing to kill the only witness to the crime. We're already seeing a lot of incidences where all the witnesses are murdered. But if they know for a fact they're going up for good, they will, I think women will be murdered far more frequently. And the next thing is that if you look at the studies of what this is actually going to cost us, you see that building the new prisons that would be necessary would cost $20 billion. We're talking about California, and they're expecting $6 billion a year costs within a few years, $6 billion per year. And we don't have this money. This means that they're going to have to force indentured labor. They're going to have slave labor inside the prisons to force men to work to support themselves and pay for the new prisons. But, and I won't even argue the ethics of this. I feel ambivalent. However, I would like to say that we're already suffering from serious unemployment. And does this mean that those in prison will have first preference to the jobs that are available? They will be doing the manufacturing. They'll have another China there with cheap labor, putting regular American workers out of work.
So that seems like a cheap shot by politicians to
Very
get them
cheap.
elected. Therapists seem to have an abysmal record. I don't know why that is. Can you comment on that?
Well, mostly because we haven't had access except through coercive therapy, as I said. They were unwilling to come in for treatment, except when forced to choose between that and jail time. But we do find that inside the prison system, there are people working who really don't go for a lot of excuses and denials and et cetera, and they seem to be doing a good job inside the prison when there's nothing to gain from the men involved. In other words, they don't get their term shortened. They're there because they really think that they were wrong and they need help. That works better than when they're given the choice of jail or.
Well, I imagine a lot of these therapists are blinded by faith themselves, and they're unwilling to, if they're atheists, they're unwilling to come out and say that to their clients because they might lose their clients.
That's one thing. Yes, there is persecution of atheists and humanists. It's also, a therapist can send a signal by simply wearing a cross.
Right.
A bad signal to the women involved saying that there's validity in the counsel that you might seek from the Bible regarding the woman's role in life.
Right. The amazing thing is, to me, Lisa, that with all the current concern and efforts to stop this mayhem, we atheists seem to be the only ones who see the connection between Bible and religious teachings and men's violent behavior against women and children.
Well, I would have to disagree slightly there. I think that the entire free thought movement, that includes humanists and ethical culturists,
Right.
all do see, in fact, this connection.
All within the free thought community then.
The entire free thought
I would agree
community
with
is
that.
very clear in this area.
Now, what kind of a man commits these despicable acts? Is there a profile to the abuser? Is there something we can look for and identify? We
do have profile, and the batterer is very similar to the rapist profile. Surprisingly enough, it's not that different from the average male profile, especially for sports figures. But there's a couple of differences that are notable. Number one, there seems to be a large incidence of waning virility. And this means, and frequently it's exacerbated by alcohol. And many of these men are not able to achieve orgasm unless they're with a woman that they either feel is inferior, they're exceptionally aroused after having beaten or humiliated someone. And that's why there's such a high incidence of rape of women after the beating. The men become very aroused by the beating itself and are able to function sexually at that point in time.
It's terrible. Let me go back a little bit historically here. When patriarchal religions demolished the previous deities, in other words, the polytheism, a god was created who was terrible in his wrath, and he rained death and destruction on all who did not accept his domination. And now we've got all these maniacs who think that they were created in his image. They're acting out the same violent patterns in society today.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a couple of quotations here that in a sense justify this male behavior.
Okay.
One is from Judges 15 and also from Samuel. It says, God's spirit is vengeance and fury. So if God's spirit is vengeance and fury, what can you expect from mere mortal man? This is the example that they're supposed to follow.
It's supposed to be the supreme example.
Exactly.
Right.
Good point. And in Jeremiah, it says, For I have kindled a fire in mine anger that shall burn forever. So if God's anger will burn forever, naturally, again, what can you expect from mortal man?
The funny thing is that these stories in the Bible were intended to teach people.
They do.
Yeah. Well, they do. They teach, it seems like they teach mostly negative things when we look at the general patterns in society. That they have ways of planning these ideas, like the creation story, which we've talked about in the past, and that damned Eve and all subsequent women. One of the reasons we don't want, that's one of the reasons we don't want that myth taught in our public schools. So we think that myths can be useful in their own way, but we need to replace the dangerous ones, the ones we've been talking about here, with stories and myths that will show us how to live together constructively and in harmony with each other. Now, I've got a couple of quotes also. There's Isaiah 3, verse 16 through 18, where the Lord comments on haughty women, saying, I will smite them and discover their secret parts.
Rape.
Well, excuse me, yeah, that sounds like rape.
That's rape. Discover their secret parts.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, Lisa Jo, there's so many things that we need, that we could get into here. It just seems like it's an endless array of facts that we could give. But do you think that recent decisions in the courts are going to help society in general in terms of abused women and children?
Yes, I think there's more hope than there ever was in the past, and that we're making progress. And I have high hopes for the future, and especially with the consciousness raising that the women's movement's doing now. Mm-hmm. But the one thing, no matter what women do, no matter how much they try to shelter or aid and help other women, this is all, in effect, is after the fact.
Right.
And the women, it's just putting Band-Aids on the wounds. Mm-hmm. And so what we really have to have is a radical revision of the entire male support system. See, there are so many things that only men can do. Because men value and respect the opinions and the ideas of other men, we need serious disapproval and verbal disagreement from other men to try to change this male bonding process that allows this thing to continue.
Mm-hmm. I think we're going to have to sum up. We've shared some facts with the audience that need to be faced if we're going to get rid of the horrible violence that is devastating our society. And we've seen that blind, unreasoning faith can be deadly. So as you were saying just now, Lisa, we must move beyond these teachings of a vengeful, jealous God. We can't treat women and children like property without tragic results. We have to move past this society. This is a two-tiered society that we have, where one gender is told that they have a God-given right to dominate the other gender and their families. There will be no peace without equality.
This is very true, and we need what the women's movement needs now, because women frequently have to go into hiding in order to escape murder. this means that we could use a system such as the witness protection program. If a contract killer, a former mafia person, can turn state's evidence and get a whole new identity, a phony work record, be set up in another new life somewhere and protected, why cannot a woman who's had attempts on her life and her children's lives be protected in the same way, given a place to hide in another state or someplace, given a new identity, and jobs found for them so they'll be able to support their own children without having to go on welfare?
And we have to emphasize, as you did just now, the fact that the churches and the major religions, and Christianity is, of course, the major religion in this country, are not offering any real solutions. They're just offering, like you said, Band-Aid cover-up solutions. We hear about all the priests that molest children and rape women. And what does the church do when this comes about? They just transfer them to another parish.
Where they're unknown.
Where they're unknown.
Right.
And eventually they become known there, and it just moves on. So that's a Band-Aid solution.
And also in the Mormon church, even though 10% of all income is taken off the top in tithing to the church, if a woman leaves her husband, in most areas the bishop will not allow her access to the Mormon welfare system on the grounds that she has refused the support of her husband. Of course, all Mormon males in good standing are priests.
Thank you so much, Lisa Jo Singletary, for sharing this assignment with us and for all that you do.
Thank you. All right.
Until next time we meet, I am Jon Nelson for Atheist United. If you would like to know more about our organization, please feel free to write us for a complimentary newsletter. Our address is shown at the bottom of the screen. Write us at Atheist United, Post Office Box 57435, Sherman Oaks, California. The zip is 91413. Or else call us at area code 818. The number is 785-1743. Realization of this project was made possible by a generous grant from the James Hervey Johnson Charitable Education Trust.